The Day Billy Fell Off the Cliff by Byron Broussard. The Day Billy Fell Off the Cliff, Part 11. Billy was standing on the flaming path in front of the hole he had dug. Here goes everything. Godspeed, Jessica. Billy put Jessica inside his backpack. He felt an emptiness that seemed bigger than the world he was in. Then he reached for Jessica and turned her into lightning. He looked for her immediately. Billy even tried to follow the lightning to see if it came back down, but it did not. Billy walked the path between cottages with a concentrated intention. He intended to see no other beast, man, nor skeleton that was not Jessica, and he intended to have no new thoughts or stories. Billy intended to pick things up from the same perspective as he left them, and he did in no time, because there was no time. Billy came around the curve of one cottage to see Jessica's flaming body standing in the doorway of the cottage across the path. In a moment, Billy completely saw her. He heard the noises she made amidst the sound of the campfire. In that same moment, he was reminded of the smell of freshly washed hair and the salty taste of skin. Billy felt with his whole heart the imminent embrace they'd share, and as he walked towards her, she looked at him. Billy's arm went up towards his backpack and came down with the golden goblet in hand. Holy shit, Billy said inside his head. The golden goblet was the only thing in view that was not on fire, and he knew what he wanted to do with it. He looked up to give the goblet to Jessica and noticed that her sword was in her hands. Jessica stood with her feet planted shoulder-length apart and parallel with her sword in both hands, pointed towards Billy. A defensive stance? Billy stopped moving towards Jessica and stood right foot in front with left hand and golden goblet extended towards Jessica. What is going on? Billy asked inside his head. He was standing almost within arm's reach, so he took a step or two back. Billy gestured with the golden goblet towards Jessica, and she took a huge, powerful swing at him. Fuck, what did I do wrong? Billy looked around and saw that two flaming women were watching the interaction from the doorway of a cottage that was further down the path. When he looked back towards Jessica, she had moved. She was close to him on his right side with the sword held low in her hands. As soon as she was noticed by Billy, Jessica thrust her sword up. It happened in no time because there was no time. Billy felt a sharp pain running through his body that he covered with his right arm as he turned to face Jessica again. Holy shit, she stabbed me, Billy said, sounding cynical. Jessica had backed away and was now holding her sword high in her right hand in an offensive manner, perpendicular to Billy. Billy was reminded of a fencing stance. He stood watching her in awe with the goblet still in his left hand and his right arm protecting his wound. She took 2 quick steps towards him and lowered her sword in both hands, and he took 2 clumsy steps backwards, swaying and looking around. Okay, here we are. Billy extended the golden goblet towards Jessica again, and did not see her movement until she was finished. Jessica's sword went from low to high, like a samurai move mixed with a baseball swing, and Billy's left arm began to burn. He took more steps back and looked at his left hand. There was a line of fire passing through his wrist. Fuck this shit, Jessica. I ain't going out like no bitch. Billy closed his eyes and entered the black of self-reflection. The image of the flaming coffee appeared, and Billy erased it with passion. Ah, what bullshit. His mind was racing. First off, how do wounds work here? A cartoonish image of Jessica stabbing him in the side appeared. The sword goes into the body and fire comes out in 3-framed image dance. Then a cartoonish image of Jessica cutting Billy's arm appeared, and the image showed Jessica swinging the sword through Billy's arm, Billy seeing the wound, and fire coming out of the cut. I have to fight with my mind. The wounds will go away if I stop thinking of them. I need to think. The black of self-reflection went all black. I have to outsmart her because I already know she is a warrior, and this is a test of will, not necessarily skill. I am at a disadvantage because I believe in her. If she doesn't believe I can hurt her, my blows will not slow her down unless I use that knowledge to create a believable surprise. I will have to minimize my attachment to the whole fire world until this is over. The sights and sounds of her aggression will probably always throw me off balance. That's it. As a last resort, I will do what I have to. Billy revisited the flaming coffee shop and sipped a cup. He then exited the black of self-reflection. Billy's left hand sprayed flames out as he put the cup inside his bag and faced Jessica, who was standing with her sword over her shoulder. Billy took his right hand off his side wound, which no longer pained him, and grabbed at his flaming left hand and ripped it off with a step back and threw it at Jessica like a frisbee. On the upswing, Billy put out his sword and jumped towards Jessica. She swung at Billy's hand and was not in the correct stance to defend Billy's sword strikes. Billy slashed down and left, then felt his hand reattach. Then he swung left to right while his left hand produced the golden goblet again. He took 2 steps to be on top of Jessica, whose arms were open with flames beginning to appear from the wounds and looking stunned. Billy put his sword away and held Jessica's head back and poured the contents of the goblet into her mouth. He could feel the emotions of fear and betrayal coming from her touch under the mountain of anger that seemed to be controlling her. Jessica began to look less stunned, and the wounds across their flaming chest that Billy had struck were closing. Clarity began to appear in Jessica's eyes. She broke out of Billy's hold, took a step back, picked up her sword, and shoved it into Billy's heart. The surprise of her movements took Billy off guard, so as he watched the sword go into him, he felt the full force of pain associated. Billy even heard the sword go inside him. He fell to his knees as she ripped out the sword with both her hands. Jessica stood over Billy and yelled in his face, spraying him with lava. Billy tried to get a grip on the situation, but all he could think about was how he had lost the upper hand and the pain in his chest and the lava beginning to cover him. "Don't you dare do that dumbass fire dance," Billy said inside his head as his body began to do the fire dance. He had taken his eyes off Jessica, who was currently eating his legs viciously. Billy noticed Jessica eating his flaming knee with malice, and his chest pain disappeared. "Holy fuck," Billy said inside his head as he picked up his sword and swung it in a strong, complete circle, creating a perimeter that Jessica was now behind. He stood up and got into the attack position. Jessica charged again, mouth open and sword in hand. Billy lunged his sword at her head and was parried away by her swift movement, leaving him open for attack. Jessica latched her teeth into Billy's neck and began to consume him again. Billy panicked. The fear of being consumed outweighed the notion of pain his mind was witnessing. He quickly shoved his sword into her neck and began to pry her from his. "I'm not going inside you, Jessica," Billy was yelling inside his head, and as he broke free of Jessica's grip, time for plan B. Jessica lunged at Billy again, but this time Billy swung his sword to create a perimeter instead of attempting an attack. Then Billy closed his eyes. He could see the light that seemed to come from every direction, and the sound of the campfire was extinguished. He stood in silence and began his fight against himself. "What the fuck are you doing, Billy? She's probably eating your ass right now," he thought aloud inside his head. "Fuck, I'm so dead. There's no way I could beat her if this doesn't work, and soon." Billy tried to get a grip on his thoughts. "Defend body," he shouted inside his head, trying to make his will clear. "Defend body? She'll blow right past those weak-ass defenses." He paused to think of a better command and said, "Be an expert swordsman like you've seen her be. But mixed with all the swordplay I've seen on television, yeah, that my body will at least be on par." He He felt more relaxed about his situation, knowing without seeing that his body would be taking care of itself for at least long enough for him to make another plan. Billy felt a wave of emotions. He felt betrayed and enraged with a hint of embarrassment. Jessica must be touching me and transferring these emotions, Billy said inside his head, and he began to feel bad for her. I caused her to get to this point, and I made her lightning like an evil scientist. She deserves revenge. The emotions began to surround Billy's awareness. He realized she was probably eating him, and he realized he deserved to be consumed. I just wanted to talk to you. I would have apologized to you, Jessica. Billy sent those words with great effort to Jessica through his touch. Then Billy opened his eyes to see that Jessica was indeed consuming him. She stood over him, and his head was the only thing that was not already inside of her. Billy did not panic. No, Jessica, I will not be eaten. She stopped, and Billy believed his words had reached her. You left me no choice. I apologize in advance. Billy shut his eyes and then thought consume her with almost perfect clarity. Billy opened his eyes to see his head open its mouth and swallow Jessica's flaming body whole. Then the screaming began inside Billy's head. Jessica screamed in defeat and shame, not using real words and not leaving room to listen to any words. Billy entered the black of self-reflection and recreated the flaming coffee shop in hopes that Jessica would recognize it and calm down. Her image was not visible, but her voice was overpowering. I don't want to mute you, Jessica, Billy screamed inside his head over her scream, but I will if I have to, and you know that. Jessica did not let up, so Billy exited the darkness of self-reflection and opened his eyes to the sound of the campfire. He was sitting on the coals and being slowly surrounded by flaming people. Billy waved at them and stood up. His arm was covered in dark hairs, and he could see wings over his shoulders. He had turned into one of the flaming beasts. Gotta fly out of here before things get more hairy. This was supposed to be a beautiful thing, Jessica. Jessica was still screaming, but the sound of the campfire was at least competing with her. Billy began to fly, and he felt weights were lifted from his shoulders. He felt like weights were lifted from his shoulders. I feel less guilty and more like we just restarted our relationship, Jessica. I'll get to know you again soon enough. Jessica responded to this by beginning to scream with even more fervor than before. Billy was reminded of the word anguish, and he muted Jessica. I'll get to know you soon enough. I'll get to know soon enough. Billy spewed a stream of lava out his beastly mouth that spilled over the top of a cottage. Billy flew around aimlessly for what felt like minutes to him before he got the idea to revisit the hole he dug. Back to the hole and the drawing board. He quickly dropped into the hole, hoping not to be seen by the flaming humans around. Once inside, Billy entered the black of self-reflection and called up Jessica's book. When the image of his fingers grasped the book and opened it, Billy heard a faint noise in the back of his head that reminded him of a scream. He flipped to the back of the book and searched for mention of the lightning. When he did not find mention of it in the last pages, he asked his intuition to search the book for him. There was nothing in Jessica's book about lightning. Billy wondered if the book talked about the lightning with other words and asked his intuition to search for mentions of reincarnation or starting over. The search again came back negative. Billy searched for his own name in the book, hoping to find a point of reference to begin his search. The book opened to a page not far from the end, and Billy began to read. Jessica walked out of her cottage and sat down on the coals. Why does it feel like I'm procrastinating right now when the world is on fire? A flaming man and woman walked past her holding hands. They don't seem to be in any rush, Jessica said inside her head. The flaming people noticed her and walked quickly out of sight. What's that? Who was I talking to? Billy and flaming coffee? Jessica got off the ground and began to walk between the cottages. Through an open door, she saw a flaming lady who was half skeleton inside a cottage. Experiments? Jessica pulled her sword from her bag and stepped inside the cottage. Tell me how it feels so I can understand, Jessica was saying inside her head as she stepped up to the flaming lady. Jessica put her sword between the showing ribs of the lady's flaming skeleton and moved the sword slowly back and forth. The skeleton began to scream, and the noises echoed over the sound of the campfire. Jessica turned away from the skeleton, still hearing the screams echo in her mind. She reached the door in time to see a familiar-looking flaming man coming around the side of a cottage, and the feeling of being incomplete consumed her. Jessica felt as if another life was calling out to her and asking her to remember what she could never know. The core result of this onslaught of unfamiliar familiarity was pain, and the core cause of the event was walking towards her with a goblet. Billy stopped reading and asked his intuition about multiple lives. He was shown a series of images depicting how his awareness is connected through lightning to the star. There were the fiery cottages with the lone star above, shooting lightning and creating sparks. The sparks would turn into balls of light, and the balls of light would turn into flaming people. The flaming people consumed each other, turning them back into balls of light. Then the sparks inside the bags, when the sparks would touch the lightning, would reach out to the star. The image of Billy's intuition moved faster until it was apparent that a power source lived inside the star. Then the images slowed down until it was apparent that the star was inside the backpack. Another star? Billy asked his intuition. The images blurred and then focused on a different perspective until Billy could see the round trip the light makes from the star to the bag and back to the star. Pieces of the whole. Billy looked at Jessica's book. The front cover read, "Jessica the Patient," in big white letters. What happened in the bag? What happened in that bag, Jessica? Billy thought about unmuting Jessica, but decided against it. We got multiple lives connected with something in the backpacks and in the star. There's no real consequences to be seen, but memory loss or disconnection or compartmentalization happens, and skeletons isolate themselves. Memory loss of multiple lives is a lot like the isolation a skeleton puts itself through. Billy's intuition shows an image of a skeleton inside the star, holding its knees in a pit. If the thing in the star isn't motivated, the flaming people are fucked. Billy paused. Just like isolation makes you weak, memories of life give strength. Even other flaming people's memories of this place can give strength. So, to motivate the thing in the star, we must use this life. So, what happened with Jessica? You came back with some memory of your past life, didn't you? That must mean her connection in the star was satisfied to some degree. Billy picks up Jessica's book and examines the spine before opening the book and searching for small print. He closed the book and looked at the blank back cover before turning the book upside down. Billy opens the back cover as if it's the front. Inverse world, inverse book. Words begin to shape themselves on the upside down pages, coming into focus as if they were always there. Mr. Intuition, Billy read as a strange feeling of revelation flooded his senses. I've cracked a code, Jessica. You may want to listen up to this shit here. Maybe I can save you. Billy unmuted Jessica. Bastard! Jessica screamed at a level above the top of the lungs inside Billy's head. Unhand my book, you bastard! She repeated this in long, loud screams like a nightmare mantra. Billy muted Jessica. Well, you are somewhat back to normal if coherent words have anything to say about it. I wonder how long that's been going on for. You know, if you do know me, that I have to read this, Jessica. And if you had faith in me, you would hope that saving myself will at least teach you how to save yourself. So I'm going to touch your book, Jessica. Billy pauses and puts the book aside. I wish I never unmuted you. I don't want to feel bad. You attacked me. Bastard! Jessica's scream was heard faintly in Billy's head. Damn, she really hates her book being touched. Billy imagined the flaming coffee shop and took his normal seat. He sipped at coffee and imagined a cup for Jessica where she liked to sit. The book appeared at Billy's hands, and he flipped it backwards and upside down and began to read. Mr. Intuition cowered as reports from Jessica's experience flooded his awareness. He rocked back and forth on the inside of the hollow star. I was, he said over and over to himself. I was with someone. Mr. Intuition almost stood up before returning to his cowering pose. He was vividly focused on her past. Mr. Intuition realized that he lost track of the present until Jessica's experience began to make him think. Again, I wasn't helpful. I was supposed to do so much more. I was. He was now aware of his clothes being torn to pieces, as well as aware of the current flow of reports from Jessica's experience. I was making real progress. Mr. Intuition looked around and noticed his own position. He seemed to himself as a boy who looked 14, covered in gray clothes that ripped due to age. I was making progress when I was with someone. He began to slow the flow of experience, sitting up a little straighter and mumbling under his breath. I was. Billy took a sip of coffee. Mr. Intuition lives inside the star and recounts your life. It seems you have him dealing with a lot, Jessica. Billy thought about unmuting her, but he also thought it best to wait until he knew a way to help her. He sipped at his coffee again. Seems I gave a little bit of life to the star fella, so it can't be all bad. He started to read again. Mr. Intuition combed through Jessica's past experiences. I was out of my body, and I was inside of his. I was communicating ideas. He stood up. I was supposed to do something. Mr. Intuition began to pace back and forth along the inner edge of the hollow star. He cleared his throat. Jessica's voice spoke. Remember. He looked up and flew from one end of the hollow star to the other, pressing his face against the plasma screen. I was supposed to remember. Mr. Intuition sighed. Remember, Jessica's voice said again. Mr. Intuition took his face off the plasma and turned himself around, then sat on it. He rocked back and forth with his arms folded as reports of Jessica's experience flooded his awareness. I was remembering. Mr. Intuition began to cower. I was remembering. Mr. Intuition cowered as reports from Jessica's experience flooded his awareness. He rocked back and forth on the inside edge of the hollow star. I was, he said over and over to himself. Billy put the book down and looked at the image of his hands. I'm so sorry, Jessica. I came at this problem with the wrong angle, and I guess I totally deserved the hostility. Billy picked up the coffee cup and then put it back down and unmuted Jessica. Unhand my book, you bastard. Let me go. She was screaming at a more normal volume that almost sounded like sentences. Jessica, will you hear me out? I know how to make the confusion go away, and I know I should have never touched your book. Come sit down in our flaming coffee shop and talk. Her new mantra continued, but to Billy's surprise, an image of her showed up across from him. Let me go. Unhand my book, you bastard. She spoke sounding scared and worn out. Billy smiled at her. I'm sorry, Jessica. A cup of coffee appeared in front of her, and she looked at it in silence. They sat together in the flaming coffee shop as Billy gathered his thoughts. You've been with me before. The first time I consumed you was a surprise for the both of us. Jessica looked away and said, Let me go. Billy continued, You were my teacher. We were figuring out this world together. We found the Pathfinder Rick, and he taught us about the lightning religion and the Beast Wars. And then I asked you to do something for me." Billy looked away. Jessica spoke softly. "Let me go." Billy sighed. "What led us to this moment is a botched experiment. I wanted to know what happens inside the bag, so I sent you to check." Jessica stood up and began to pace. "I sent you in the bag and asked you to remember what happens inside. We already knew that from the bag comes the lightning, and that brings you back here. I thought it was a sure shot, and I apologize. We didn't learn about the bag, but we did find out that you have a little boy in the star that's watching over you." Jessica pulled at her flaming hair. "What? What the fuck are you talking about? Let me go." Billy's image stood and walked towards Jessica. "I will let you go, but I have to make things right again. Your book said the warrior the first time you were with me, and now it says the patient. I can't destroy your character twice. I will figure out a way to help you first." Billy sat back down. "Did you comprehend any of the Mr. Intuition story? You may have been yelling during that revelation." Jessica let go of her hair. She sat back down and eyed Billy coldly. "Fuck you, Billy. Your help is what destroys." She took a sip of her coffee. "I don't know this Mr. Intuition kid." Billy smiled and got a little more comfortable. "Well, the present version of you is almost back to normal. Now we gotta find a way to put you through the process of bag and lightning safely. And that's where I think Mr. Intuition comes into play. He says that he was you, and you were able to ask him to remember. I wish I had known that he was already lost in your memories. We could have asked him to do something else." Billy thought about it. "In fact, Mr. Intuition will see this conversation at some point, so theoretically we could have a conversation." Jessica looked at Billy with growing suspicion. "I'm not up for any more experiments, Billy. If you're really trying to help, you won't make me." Billy shook his head. "You're right. I won't ask you for anything that isn't a sure thing anymore. You're right." Jessica relaxed and Billy continued. "I know how we'll figure out the bag and the Mr. Intuition character. Let's go find Rick again." Billy exited the darkness of self-reflection and flew up into the air. "Oh shit, you really are a beast, Billy," Jessica teased. Billy stopped and hovered above a cottage, then promptly turned back into a flaming human. He fell to the ground and looked around. No one had spotted him, so he walked into the cottage to find a hole in the coals. Rick was now a full skeleton in a hole, holding his knees. "That's Rick?" Jessica asked, trying to hide her disappointment. "Yeah, that's him. Don't worry. I have a lot of faith in our Pathfinder here, although his book may not be called Pathfinder anymore." Billy stepped into the hole and consumed Rick. He then sat down in Rick's hole and entered the black of self-reflection. "Hello, Rick. Welcome aboard." Jessica sat in the booth of a flaming coffee shop. Looking around for Rick. "He's a lot quieter than I expected." She looked disappointed, then sipped her coffee. Yeah, no one's better than you, Jessica. He was a skeleton. I don't think they are the talking or thinking type." Billy grabbed for Rick, and then the book appeared. "I probably won't have to mute him like someone we both know." Jessica stood up with her head cocked to the side. "Too soon, asshole. Watch yourself, Billy, or you'll have to mute someone we both know again." "Doesn't sound like much of a threat." "Watch out or I'll force you to easily subdue me." Billy laughed, and Jessica screamed so loud that Billy almost muted her. "We have work to do. I can't scream all day. Let's get on with it." She sat back down in her chair and sipped coffee with both hands. Chop, chop. Billy looked at Rick's book. The cover read Rick the Passenger in big bold letters. The passenger this time. Well, welcome aboard, mate. Doesn't that seem like a good omen? Jessica's image looked up with impatience. Billy turned his awareness back to the book. Seems like a good omen to me. Sounds like I may be the path now. Billy looked back towards Jessica. For more than just you. Billy then flipped it backwards and upside down and began to read. Miss Intuition swam through the space of the star, with her eyes always on the plasma screen. I will, I will, I will, she repeated over and over to herself. The whole sphere of plasma screen was covered in possibilities of Rick's awareness. Miss Intuition stopped in front of a possibility image on the screen and watched for a second. I will. The image disappeared. She swam across the screen, scrolling in curvy directions through the awareness possibilities. Miss Intuition stopped in front of another possibility image on the screen and watched for a second. I will. The image and 3 images next to it disappeared. Billy looked over to Jessica. Holy shit, right? You have one of these things too, Mr. Intuition. Jessica groaned and shook her head. What does this have to do with anything? This feels irrelevant to me, Billy. Jessica's image looked out, waiting for answers to bridge the interest. I was saying, you also have a kid in the star looking out for you. Billy took a pause that translated to smug revenge. Your Mr. Intuition is different from Rick's misintuition, and that yours remembers your past. This one seems fixated on the future, Billy said inside his head slowly. Jessica pushed her coffee away and collapsed her head into her arms on the table. What does that have to do with us right now, though? Jessica asked, muffled through her arms. Billy thought for a second, then exited the black of self-reflection. He was greeted by the sound of the campfire opening his eyes. He was greeted by the sound of campfire opening his eyes to the flaming world. He stepped out of Rick's pit. Billy walked out of the cottage and looked up at the lone, unmoving star in the sky. That's right there. That right there is where Mr. and Miss Intuition live, and they exist in real time. Not only that, but we probably all have different ones, and from what I... That right there is where Mr. and Miss Intuition live, and they exist in real time. Not only that, but we probably all have different ones, and from what we know, they can see the past and the future. The star made its lonely wind sound as Billy looked at it. Then he turned away and walked back into the cabin and back into Rick's pit. Billy closed his eyes and entered the darkness of self-reflection. So, you want to talk to them? Jessica's image took a sip of coffee as she sat in the flaming coffee shop. You seem to find the best of teachers, and these MIs may be your best yet. Knowing the past and the future should definitely uncover some hard facts. Now we're cracking, and these MIs are actually accessible. Me can be talked to if we know how to get me's attention correctly and ask me the right questions, Billy told Jessica in a happy tone. Then I'll learn how to get you into a new body with your old memories. Billy looked towards the book and began to read again. I will. I will. I will, she repeated over and over to herself. Miss Intuition swam from image to image faster while taking more time to watch before saying, I will. Miss Intuition stopped in front of a small image in the plasma screen of the star. She watched as the possibility played and then said, I will. The image disappeared along with all the images it was touching. I will eventually run out. Miss Intuition looked around the star in a panic. I will not become stagnant. Miss Intuition swam around the inside of the star, glancing at Rick's possibilities. Billy stopped reading and returned to the flaming coffee shop. Jessica's image walked back and forth across the flaming floor. So, how do you decipher that one, Billy? I think I need to take a break on this or go at it from a different angle. Billy asked his intuition about possibilities and was shown a point inside a sphere. The point moved towards the sphere, and the sphere moved moments after to compensate for the movement of the point. Billy sighed. What's this supposed to be? The MI inside of the star or something? I asked my intuition about possibilities, and it showed me this, Billy answered her. Ask it about the possibilities of the MIs, Jessica spoke in Billy's head, without interrupting his vision with her image. All right, show me the possibility of me, Billy asked his intuition and was shown a more detailed version of the point inside a sphere. This version had a point inside the point. The point furthest inside moved in a direction inside the middle point. The middle point moved moments after to compensate for the movement of the point furthest inside. The outside sphere moved moments after the middle point moved to compensate for the movement of the middle point. The image repeated in different directions, always beginning with the movement of the point furthest inside and spreading out to the movements of the sphere. At the end of the movement, each point was centered inside their respective spheres. My intuition acts on possibilities that affect me. I act on possibilities that affect what I see and how I look and what I do. Wait, Miss Intuition, Mr. Intuition, and my intuition are all me. Isn't that neat? We can just refer to them all as me. Billy laughed for a moment and then went on. The next question is, what is the possibility of the sphere? The possibility of this world that's covered in fire. Billy asked me to show him the possibility of the world. The sphere he was shown before added another depth of detail to them. The image zoomed out until the outer sphere looked like a point. The image continued to zoom out until the point finally had an outer sphere itself. The image continued zooming out to reveal the image that they began with. The images went through the animation slowly before picking up speed. All spheres are weirdly connected somehow, Jessica said, offering her advice on the answers from me. Billy turned back to Rick's inverse book and flipped through the pages towards the end and began to read. Miss Intuition slowly swam between three different possibilities. I'll wait. I will wait. I will wait. She repeated this to herself over and over. Miss Intuition swam to one of the images in a flash and stared at the possibility in the plasma screen. I will see the death of the lightning religion. The image disappeared, and Miss Intuition swam away in a panic. I will wait. I will wait. I will wait. Billy put down the book and returned to the flaming coffee shop to see Jessica sitting down. We've got to be missing something, Billy said to Jessica. Telling Rick's me that it can also see the past won't actually help his predicament, and telling your me that it can see the future won't solve your problem either. So, you don't want to talk to me anymore? Jessica's image made a little shrug. I feel like the connection would help, even if it just helps our self-esteem, small victories and such. Jessica folded her hands together and awaited Billy's response. You know what? The connection would help. The connection of the timeline. Billy thought about the spheres and points moving one after the other. Since we are both beyond time, we have the ability to affect which sphere will move the others. Maybe even be able to move them all simultaneously. Billy thought about me inside of him and thought about how to access the future. Then he grabbed for Rick's book and opened the inverse to the last page and began to read. Miss Intuition swam around the blank plasma screen of the inner star. There was one possibility left, that she would glance over before returning to the blank yellow screen. I will wait. I will wait. I will. She swam to the image of Rick's possibility and watched for a long time. I will tell Billy that the only way out for me is through him. The only way out is through you, Billy. And I wait as your passenger till the time arrives when you restore my possibilities. That was dramatic, Jessica said, looking questioningly at Billy. Apparently you saved us or some shit. All Rick here has got to do is wait and poof, saved. Jessica's image sipped coffee and put the cup down. I'm going to try to talk to me, the one inside of me. Billy thought about his intuition and if he should address me out loud or through contemplation. He was shown an image of a balanced scale. So, you are here, me, Billy spoke inside his head. An image of a point in a sphere appeared. Can you show me letters and words? Billy asked, and his book appeared before him. He knew it existed. Jessica had read some of it. The book was blank, and when Billy turned it around and upside down, it just appeared normal. He opened it and saw blank pages begin to be filled. Ask your question and I will respond here, me wrote. Billy was surprised that the communication would be this simple. How has no one figured this out yet? He asked, knowing that it was because everyone else was distracted by the world of fire and the darkness of self-reflection. They don't believe in themselves. You do, me answered on the next blank page. Billy thought about asking what me looked like. Then he changed his mind to something more interesting. Do you know what you look like, me? I do not know what I look like in relation to anything. Let us find out together. I am shaped like a 14-year-old woman. My clothes are the color of a rainbow. There was a pause in the writing, and a new paragraph started where me continued. I would relate myself to Rick's misintuition, the difference being that I am me and in a rainbow-colored cloth. Do you consider yourself and not me? Billy thought about Jessica and Rick and how their me was so disconnected. I do not often consider myself at all, me responded. Well, aren't you inside of me? Billy asked inside of his head. No, I'm inside the star, and where you go when you are inside of the bag. No, I am inside of the star, and where you go when you are inside of a bag. Jessica and Rick are inside of you. Me wrote on the next blank page. I am able to put myself inside of you if that is what you want, but I do not think that it is. Jessica spoke inside of Billy's head. Why wouldn't he want you inside of him? Billy wondered if me would respond to Jessica's question. Too much knowledge can ruin direction, agenda, and motivation, me wrote down in the book. Is that what you relay? Is that why you rely on me asking questions? Do I somehow also help you, me? Billy asked in awe. I am relying on you, Billy. You are in a unique position to make the best decisions based on what you currently think is right. I am in a position to offer advice and information, but all the information at once would ruin the process. Billy looked to the image of Jessica. You told me this once, Jessica. You said that depending on where you started with the lesson on this place, I would come to different conclusions. You made me choose between learning about you and learning about the world itself. Jessica frowned. So, what choice did you make? She asked. I chose to hear about how you handled your first moments here. Instead of having teacher bias either way. Although I did end up feeling an obligation to help you. But then again, maybe you kept it just personal enough to sow that feeling inside of me. Jessica rolled her eyes, and Billy looked back to the book. What happens when all spheres and points move in unison? They don't move at all, Me wrote down. Well, what happens when I am able to move first? Can I make a plan that you are not manipulating? Billy asked me. Manipulating? More like guiding. And yes, you can make your sphere move first, but the other spheres will move moments after you. The other spheres will move moments after you make your move to compensate for the motion, Me answered Billy on a new page. Billy thought about it, then exited the black of self-reflection. The light that seemed to come from everywhere shone for a moment before Billy opened his eyes and heard the sound of the campfire. Billy got out of the pit that Rick dug and stepped out of the cottage. What are you doing? Jessica asked him inside his head. Billy thought about what Me looked like. Then he reached inside his bag and pulled her out. They stood inches apart from each other while moments passed. What the fuck, Billy? How did you do that? Jessica asked him. He is Billy the hero. That's how he did it. It's so lovely to be out of that cramped star, Billy. I thank you so much. Me told them in a flat-toned voice inside of Billy's head. Me's skin was Vanta black, and she was the only thing that wasn't on fire. Me was half the size of Billy, and she was dressed in a large rainbow-colored tunic with a golden rope around her waist. Her eyes were gray spheres with Vanta black pupils. Me had tons of tiny short dreads on her head that were as black as her skin. She smiled at Billy. Her teeth seemed to be made of glowing white light. Me then turned and ran.